Hello, everyone. This is Trip, and I'm here with Dominic Crossan. And today we're going to be talking about Paul and his relationship with Rome, the challenge of civilization and its addiction to violence, and just what Paul's radical alternative vision looks like. We got a whole bunch of questions sent in from all the members of our class this Lent, and it's based on the third lecture. There are 5 lectures. And if you say to yourself, whoa, I want to watch this lecture. If the questions are this exciting, then I clearly want to see the visual lecture with pictures and from all over the different archaeological options, looking at all the different texts that Dom raises in it. Then head over to crossanclass.com where you can join up, get access to the lectures, and you'll get emails where you can respond and send questions for the future Q&As. So very excited to be looking at some amazing questions from the group this time. Now, Dom, before we jump into that, I think it might be good just for you to, in a sense, this is kind of the turning point in the lecture series of looking at how the radical response to Paul was embraced in the life of Tekla and expressed there, and how it's resisted in Luke Acts. So when we think of these two different responses to Paul, what's the goal in trying to name the contrast of Paul's vision for the world in the resurrection and the challenge of civilization?
And I think the pivot here is what I was trying to do is locate a place where Paul had to look at the Roman Empire. I mean, of course, it's all around him. How can you not? If he's using money at all of any type, he's going to know about it. But I wanted to try and get him in a place, Galatia, where especially you could see the acts of the divine Augustus, as it were. Bring them together there, because in other ones I talked about, say, the altar of Augustine peace. Well, I wanted to locate them there and then try to imagine the Res Gestae, the actual writings. Now, the writings of Augustus, and I mean the writings, what he wanted to say. I think as close as you can get to what he's actually thinking. And then Paul, say, writing to the Galatians or anywhere else, and to bring them together in the same locality. So that's the pivot that's happening here.
And for maybe you want to say just a bit that sets this up about the picture that's behind you.
Oh, yeah.
And in the role it plays in the visual lecture.
Yeah, I thought you're probably getting fed up with seeing Caesar and Paul. So I thought, what's different? Okay, we're going to be talking a lot about what's called in Latin the title of it. Caesar or Augustus didn't give him this title, but it's what it is. The acts are the deeds of the divine Augustus. And if you want to talk about justification by actions, read the acts of the divine Augustus. We have it in Latin and we have it in Greek. What I put behind me is 2 big chunks of a Greek text from Apollonia, which is near Pisidian Antioch. So Paul, we don't know Paul was here, but it's the Greek text. And it was once in the garden. That's why I was able to get such a good picture of it. If we blew those up to full size, you could read the Greek, actually, from the garden of the Yalvach Museum. We'll talk more about that today. And Paul probably wouldn't have seen these, but at least this is in Greek. So I want to put inscriptions behind me. So today we want to talk about inscriptions from Caesar, as it were, epistles from Paul, and bring them into confrontation in Galatia.
Awesome. Well, we have some great questions. Thank you for everyone that sent them in. If they were long, I attempted to shorten them so we could fit them on the screen, because it was fun last time, and a number of you appreciated being able to see the questions. And sometimes it's good for Dom and I to remember what we started talking about.
Yes, exactly. The time I'm finished, I go, well, what was that question?
Yes. All right. Well, the first question today comes from Mark, who asks, how does Caesar's autocracy differ from other governments Paul encountered or knew about? Did Paul draw parallels between Rome and previous empires like Daniel?
All right, let me begin with the first half. I'm going to say this. Augustus was a magnificent, however you judge it, politician, first rate, world class politician, which means that as an oligarch, he was, let me put it bluntly, he was actually competent to begin with, which is always good. But especially, I think he invented a new form of imperialism that it wasn't there with the Assyrians, the Babylonians, not even the Persians or the Greeks. I'm going to call it a territorial imperialism. In other words, instead of having the army, the legions, sitting around in Rome ready to move wherever they were, he put them on the periphery, along the Rhine, the Danube, the Euphrates, the North African frontier. And everything inside that was Pax Romana. Now, there may be troubles on the frontiers, but if you were living at Ephesus or Alexandria, you didn't see legions beating up people. Pax. That was an ingenious idea. He invented, we might say, bases. The idea of keeping the legions out there, keeping them on the periphery so everything inside is safe. So that's one thing he did. A brand new invention of a new type of empire, not what you might call a tributary empire where the center has the military and goes out every now and then if you don't pay your taxes. So peace. And if you're going to talk about a different type of peace, you have to face, this is serious, the Pax Romana and the altar, as we saw, I think, before, of the Augustan peace. They knew it was not just Roman peace, but Augustan peace. Okay, secondly, of course he must have known about Daniel. I don't know if he's ever even quoted them. I can't remember. But surely he must have known about Daniel 7. And he must have asked himself, if he's thinking, and that's always the danger when you're dealing with the Bible, if all of these empires, say it was the Babylonians, the Medes, the Persians, the Greeks, if they all come and go and God judges them all, what's the basic thing wrong that keeps erupting empires? Is there something else going on behind it? It's like if you see a person who's always breaking open with sores, you begin to wonder, maybe there's something inside that's generating all of this. So Paul, I think, would have been asking himself about that. And I don't think seriously Paul ever ran into anything else besides the Roman Empire and used its sea lanes free of pirates, its roads free of bandits, in order precisely to criticize it.
One of the things that response makes me think of is that one of the funniest scenes in The Life of Brian, the Monty Python film, where they start complaining about the Judean Front, the revolutionary group that spends a whole 10 minutes discussing the 9 different revolutionary groups, which one's the best. But they're like, well, what did Rome ever do for us? And they're, well, the aqueducts. Okay, well, besides the aqueducts, and it gets bigger and bigger and bigger. And I think one of the challenges in thinking about this question of civilization is naming the engine that's problematic about it, without kind of like dismissing the ways in which it created kind of institutions or infrastructure and things that helped facilitate life. So I wonder how that dynamic shows up.
And absolutely, Paul could not have known, for example, when he was going from the coast inland to Pisidian Antioch, we'll talk about that today. I'm sure he went on the Roman road. I'm sure he didn't slog. Some scholars have suggested he was in a hurry and he slogged right through the mountains. We went through those mountains in an air-conditioned bus. So I have great respect for somebody who did it on foot. But even on a Roman road, it was a bit longer, it was a bit safer. So Paul must have known that it was only within the liberties, if we use that word, of the Roman Empire that he could criticize it. And that's something, of course, all of us, if we are still living in free countries, can use, of course, the possibilities of free speech, if we still have it, in order to criticize. And that is, we hope, to make better what we're living. So, yeah, Paul must have known that.
Yeah. In Sophia's question is really around that kind of engine of violence of sorts. Why characterize civilization as violent normalcy? Is this violence uniquely human compared to biological violence in nature?
Thank you, Sophia. I am kind of stuck with the word violence. We use it, say, for a violent hurricane, which is not violent at all. It's just doing its thing. Violent tornadoes, anything else. We talk about animal violence. The only thing I've ever been able to do to separate it is to use and hyphenate it escalatory violence. Escalatory violence as a peculiar thing, maybe of human violence. But when I talk about violence, I am talking exclusively about what we human beings do because of our greed or because of whatever reason that no animal does. No way the lions in the Serengeti will get together tomorrow and say, I'm fed up with all these gazelles. Let's kill them all. You know,
Yeah.
I'm tired of chasing these guys. Let's just kill them and we can leave them there for dinner. Instinct protects them from being stupid. Nothing protects us from being fatal and stupid. Nothing except conscience. We came out of the Garden of Eden with the knowledge of good and evil. Not just knowledge. Knowledge of good and evil is called conscience. That's all we got to stop us from destroying ourselves. So I want especially a word for the violence that we do, that threatens our world, ourselves, other animals. That's what I wish I had a separate word, honestly.
Is the way you're using it similar to like how Richard Horsley talks about the spiral of violence in his work?
Yes. I mean, my term is, and I read that years ago, and yes, it probably influenced me, I'm sure, as Richard did very much. Escalatory violence. You saw it there when you're dealing with the beginning of Genesis 4 with a single murder, fratricidal murder, Cain and Abel, and then you end up with Lamech in the same chapter saying, you hit me, I kill you. Okay, that's escalatory violence. And that's all in that same chapter. So already we're aware in Genesis 4, hey, we escalate the violence.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, in the lecture, you spend some time looking at the creation story and then the first sin in chapter 4 of Cain killing Abel. And that's the context for Jamal's question, asking, how does positioning Sabbath as creation's crown change our understanding of human responsibility?
Yes, and it's a place where knowing the sources is very, very helpful. For example, the priestly source is in Genesis 1. By Genesis 1, I mean 1:1 to 2:4a, the first, what we call the first creation story. Then it picks up immediately in Genesis 5, as if we had nothing in between. Immediately, Seth is the firstborn of Adam and Eve, and off we go. In between, we have chapters 2 and 3 and 4. So very deliberately, I think, when the Hebrew Bible and then eventually our Christian New Testament was being put together after probably the return from Babylonian exile under the Persian dispensation, very deliberately, I think the priestly authorities who were probably in charge of it, their scribal elites, said, okay, we're not starting this story with Adam and Eve, Cain and Abel. We're going to write a whole new creation story. And it's going to be crowned not by, as I said, by human beings. They're going to be the work of a late Friday afternoon when nobody does decent work. It's going to be crowned by the Sabbath. And we're going to put human beings in charge of the world to run it for God under Sabbath rules. Now, okay, what's Sabbath rules? It means you got to go to church for 1 hour every Sunday? No. Sabbath rules: read Sabbath day, read Sabbath year, read Sabbath jubilee. All the texts are there. They're ready to be read. And what they are is to try and take, to use evolutionary terms, time and place, mass and energy under distributive justice. You can read the texts. What happens on the Sabbath day is everyone, including your slaves and your domestic draft animals, get rest. And Philo, in a marvelous gloss, and that says, see, everyone is free. Not even the bushes and the trees can be cut down on the Sabbath day. They're free too. The whole world is free by Sabbath rules. Nobody can do anything to them. So the Sabbath creation story sets up a whole different optics to which you're supposed to read the Bible. And we did the same by accepting it, so it runs our Bible too. Read Genesis 1. That's the creation model. That's the overture for the whole.
Mhm. Yeah, um the in that in that part of the lecture, you talk about the nature of sin, and oftentimes it gets placed right. Genesis 3, the disobedience of Adam and Eve, and not when it's actually named in 4 after the murder, when Cain kills Abel. And you reference kind of the Augustinian obsession with sex. Elena asks this question: could you elaborate on the significance of original sin being violence versus sexuality, and how this challenges Augustinian theology? Doesn't he agree the city of man is founded on love of self and violent self-assertion? Which just anyone with a deep cut to the city of God in their question, just this 5 nerd points, just a nice city of God reference.
Yeah, so I'm glad that is there, because there's a lot in that question. Okay, first of all, in the story of 2 and 3, Genesis 2 and 3, Adam and Eve, really there is nothing in there about disobedience. The word is never used. There is nothing in there about punishment. There is nothing in there about sin. You can certainly read it all in if you want to, by all means, of course, but they're not there. And in the Jewish tradition, which is not at all reticent in the Old Testament of saying, you did this wrong, they never go back and say, you really did it wrong right from Adam. Adam maybe give us bad example, but the idea of an original sin as a genetic stain is absolutely not Jewish as far as I can see. It's a Christian idea. So that's the first thing. We have an original sin. All right. Even if we have original sin, then why do we start it with sex? Well, as far as I understand, now I'm talking about, this is more precise, I'm talking about the confessions. I'm not talking, when I say this, about the city of God. This is funny. When I just got these questions a bit before we started, and I, instead of looking up, I wanted to figure out the dates of, I could have guessed the dates, I thought, but I wanted to know the dates for so I asked Alexa, when did St. Augustine write his Confessions? And she told me the year is 400. And she also told me that in 413, he wrote the City of God. Now, I'm talking about not the City of God, which was written after Rome had been sacked. And Augustine was thinking about cosmic stuff that he might have been thinking about before, that Rome wasn't somehow eternal, that maybe you had to rethink a lot of things. But I'm talking about the Confessions. When he really, okay, how do I put it? When Augustine tried to be a celibate, he was obsessed by the idea that somehow certain organs would not actually do what the will told them to do. That seemed to bother him. He should have taken it up with God, really. But he decided that apparently the fact that, let's stick with him, that the male organ seems to have a will of its own, and I'm simply talking now about erection or nighttime, something like that. Maybe that's the human body, especially the male body, is out of control of the will, and that's like God is not in control of the world. So maybe that's what happened in Eden, that somehow or other we lost control of our body, again, the male, and that means God lost control of the world for us. So I find that awful stuff. I really do. I mean, I spent a large chunk of my life as a celibate. And, if you want to get specific, certain things you should recognize as small graces from God and get on with it. Don't make a big thing about it. But I think Augustine was also a Roman gentleman, and somehow being out of control in any way bothered him. So I want to say, take it out of the Garden of Eden. And if you want to talk about original sin, let's start where it's first mentioned in chapter 4, I think verse 7, and it's fratricidal murder, and it escalates. That's at least where we should start talking
Mhm.
about it if we want to talk about original sin.
Yeah. Yeah. Awesome. Well, Mike's question here, and it was a long one I had to shorten, was really looking at the kind of development of humanity over time and the way civilizations change through different kind of larger periods. He asks, how does Genesis 4 portray civilization's development through Cain's lineage? What implications does this have for understanding the progress and different stages of civilizational development? And there he went on to talk about all through chapter 11.
All right. And for me, really, it was sort of revelatory when I first really saw Genesis 4. I'd read it and gone right through it and sort of thought to myself, oh, yeah, Cain shouldn't have done that, of course. But I was reading against the background of Mesopotamia, modern Iraq, as the cradle of civilization, as the dawn of civilization. That's just other stuff I was reading. So, wait a minute, civilization dawned and was cradled? What was going on before it? So civilization is simply a form of even cosmic wide culture. I mean, human beings could exist without civilization. I mean, does that mean open slaughter? So I began to think. Then I read chapter 4. I, this author knows what's going on. Really, they're giving me the Neolithic agricultural revolution from the dark underbelly of it, as it were. So, for example, who builds the first city? Cain, not Seth, but Cain. The first thing he does is build a city. Oops, then maybe city isn't so great. So, if we're going to end up the book of Revelation with a city, maybe that's not good news. So, then as it goes on, you see it's Lamech's descendants. So, Cain to Lamech's about 5 generations later. Lamech's descendants invent tools. They invent iron and bronze tools. Now, okay, we're compressing history rather, but basically, the invention of civilization is attributed to Cain's descendant Lamech, and it's Lamech who has invented and boasted to his wives that he has created escalatory violence. Strike me, I kill you.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I think that's helpful. And you could see how it would easily be developed all the way through chapter 11 to the Tower of Babel and such. That just that shift between focusing on 3 or 4 as to where the problem emerges. Like if 3 takes that Augustine confessions internal of the individual approach, 4 looks at the whole lineage
Yes.
after the advent of civilization and the way it spirals and rackets up through more tools and more organization and population, all the way up to a tower trying to.
Yeah. And then you have to get to the 2 different accounts again and play them against one another of the actual deluge. And it's, according to the priestly one, as far as I remember, it's because we are too violent. But of course, then God's solution to human violence is divine violence. But in the priestly edition, again, in chapter 9 of Genesis, the only time I think in the entire Bible, God in effect says, I shouldn't have done that. I mean, what God says, I won't do it again. Okay, I won't try another deluge trick. But okay, if you won't do it again, that's an oblique way politically of saying I shouldn't have done it at all, maybe. So
Yeah. Mistakes were made, Dom.
mistakes were made. Yes.
All right.
We don't apologize.
Yeah. Mark asked a question, but there are others that ask similar ones. And this, if God intends peace through nonviolence, why does God engage in violence throughout Hebrew scripture?
Okay, now, Mark, I'm going to press you a little bit on this. I think we should never ask that question without saying that the worst violence in the Christian Bible, let me put it this way, is the book of Revelation. So any way that somebody, especially if you're coming from a Christian background, I'm not putting this on you if you are, I would never ask about violence in the Hebrew scriptures. I would ask violence throughout the scriptures, with the great grand finale in what you have, the book of Revelation, where Christ comes back to do it right, not on any kind of a peace donkey, but on a war horse. So basically, that's us. That's why the first account of creation put in by those people who are trying to make we really read the Bible carefully said nothing about punishments by God. They said we are created in God's image and likeness, and we are told to run the world according to Sabbath justice. That's our mandate from Genesis 1. Now, what if we don't follow it? Why are there no punishments, sanctions? Why doesn't Deuteronomy somehow get into Genesis 1? Because if you are made in the image and likeness of God, if that is taken as truth, then that is your destiny. That is your identity. Just go ahead and live differently and see if it works. In other words, think consequences, not punishments. So I would say, of course, we want a God who's just like us and who punishes preferably other people, of course, rather than us. We have mercy and forgiveness for us. Other people really get slaughtered and all the rest of it. So, of course, I am not surprised that we have a God who's just like us regularly. What I am amazed at is that we have something like Genesis 1 that sets up time. I want to emphasize this. Sabbath day, Sabbath year, Sabbath jubilee gives you days, years, centuries. It sets up time itself. It's like evolution, the Big Bang setting up time and place, matter, and energy. All of that is now under the Sabbath, because that constrains everything. How far can you go on the Sabbath? What can you do on the Sabbath? So everything comes now under Sabbath distributive justice. That's the extraordinary thing. I am not surprised that we keep going back and say, well, Jesus came and did this donkey thing and love your enemies and turn the other cheek. Yeah, fine. Get over it and come back on a war horse and do it right. I'm not the least bit surprised by the book of Revelation. You can see it coming.
Yeah, that's hopeful. Miguel asked a question because you focused on a very specific moment of Roman propaganda, but what evidence shows how local populations responded to that kind of propaganda? Was their compliance merely external, or did they develop real devotion in the kind of prescribed religious responses?
Okay, let me say two things and take you back to Ankara and to that temple. They keep saying the temple of Roman Augustus. I keep looking for an inscription that says Roman Augustus, but it's a temple of Augustus at least. And the Latin and the Greek inscriptions of the Res Gestae. The Latin is written so you'd have to see it as you're going into the temple, and you couldn't really see it unless you're going in. But the Greek is written along the outside, so even walking past it, you could see it. Now, you might be able to read it, but what's that big chunk of Greek? And you'd ask somebody, what's it about? And you'd probably get a fast summary. Now, so ordinary people would know about this. And it's very interesting to compare the Greek text and the Latin text, because what's left out in the Greek text is very interesting. They don't say, for instance, anything about taking over the whole world for the Roman people. They do mention that he spent a lot of money on stuff because that's what they would like Rome to do for them. Thank you very much. We would like you not to bother conquering us. But yes, if we have an earthquake, thank you very much. We'd like some large donations. And after all, that's in the Res Gestae that he spent all this money. So you can watch what ordinary people would know about it. They would have to know that. So I think you can learn from these monumental inscriptions two things. You're getting a message, I don't know what it says, and it's big. That puts you in your place. But yes, you can ask those who are able to read, kind of what's going on there. And I think this gives us an idea how people accepted this. They were seeing, what can we get out of this? So they're going to skip all the conquest stuff in the title, but yeah, expenditures we're interested in. We're interested in help if we have earthquakes. Now, your second question, this is a huge difference. the gods of Greece and Rome were gods of power. And you wanted very much to get on their good side, and you wanted to worship them in the right way. They were like having a boss who has a very big ego and a very short temper and a very insecure personality, which usually goes with a big ego, by the way. So these are dangerous people. You want to do everything right. Now, if you go over to the Jewish God, yes, he's a God of power too, but he's a God of justice. Nobody would ever say in Rome, like I think Leviticus says, be just as I am just. Zeus would never say that. He would never say, be holy as I am holy. He might say, be horny as I am horny, and you go to prison. Every time we hear about him, he's raping somebody. So the Jewish God is a God of holiness and justice. If you want to get into holiness and justice in the Roman world, go to a philosopher. Do not go to a God. God is about power. It doesn't make them different. It's simply that they've separated power from justice, and they're equated in the Jewish tradition. So devotion, let me give you an example. If you have a boss who has a very, very powerful position, but a terribly weak, a big ego, in other words, a weak personality, you walk very carefully. Are you devoted when you do everything that boss tells you? I leave that open. It's not the way I use devotion. It's probably how you are before a bully with awesome power. You're more scared. You might be respectful, but I don't find anything actually in the gods of Greece and Rome that can say to a human being, be holy as I am holy, and then explain, as Leviticus does, what it means to be holy.
That kind of faux devotion, Dom, sounds really similar to some people in cabinets per se.
Well, yes. I mean, I think we have some very interesting examples from which we can I'm very grateful to it for having teaching lessons that we can see, okay, this is how things happen. And yes, these things happen. If you imagine God as ultra bully, the great heavenly bully, then this is the way you operate. Stay cool, stay calm, keep your head down.
Yeah. Priya has a question that follows on this. Was Augustus' resume for divinity known to illiterate people, thinking that, it's a text? You mentioned a bit about that. And does that help us understand Paul offering an alternative resume through Christ crucified yet raised?
Yeah, I mean, what we were talking about is trying to understand what was Augustus up to by writing what were called the Res Gestae, the Acts of the Divine Augustus. He'd written a last will and testament. So what was he doing with this thing? Now, the clue is, he says, bronze columns at the front of my mausoleum. So I'm, as it were, poised between life and death, as it were, as you come from, you're coming north into the Campus Martius. And here's what you read if you went into the mausoleum. This is his resume appealing to the Roman Senate. Am I not worthy of divinization by the Senate? Because that's the only divinization that Augustus really cares about. Popular stuff is nice, but the Senate he cares about. So now, again, an ordinary person, they're going to see these two huge, it's about 2,500 words in bronze. This is big. And you're going to ask people, what's it saying? And you're going to find out what it says, at least in resume. I think that is huge even for ordinary people. The fact it's in bronze, it's not just carved like the ones behind me. Wow, this must be very important. Now, over against that, obviously Paul can only paint a picture. Christ crucified, Christ risen. He doesn't have images yet. But he's asking you to imagine, of course. And to ask, by the way, okay, we know what a crucifixion is like. What's a resurrection, Paul? The Corinthians had to ask him. We know what an ascension is because we hear about that all the times. Augustus has gone up there. But what's this resurrection business? Are you talking about an ascension? Are you saying Jesus has ascended to God just like Augustus or Moses or Romulus? Or what's a resurrection? He would have to describe it. There's no other way. I don't think he could paint a picture. But you're having, in a way, the weakness of a text against the power of marble. And the
Yeah.
earthquakes took care of the marble, and the text we still have.
Yeah. Bill asked a question about this, and it was a quite long email or message, but about asking whether Res Gesta could have influenced Mark's gospel. And there are a number of references in it of even like the beginning of the Gospel of Mark. So
Yeah, I certainly see it at the beginning, not just the Res Gestae, but the whole idea of Augustus as Son of God. It's hard for anyone, I think, in the first century to read the opening of Mark's Gospel and not think also of Augustus. They could think of Son of God out of the Old Testament, David as Son of God, or in the Exodus, they could think of Moses speaking, what is it, to Pharaoh, I was going to say, to Pharaoh, and talking about let my son go. But yeah, you're going to think of the Son of God in the first century is good old Augustus. Now, I don't see, honestly, Bill, any direct connections between the Res Gestae and those multiple endings, because the multiple endings simply come from the fact that Mark ends his gospel with nothing. They fled away and they told nobody nothing. Well, then how are we even talking about this 40 years later? That's exactly what Mark wants you to ask. You didn't go to Galilee like you were told. What did you do? You stayed in Jerusalem. So those who went to Galilee, I'm locating Mark, by the way, around the villages of Caesarea Philippi, far north of Galilee. He stops it there deliberately. That's the ending. 16:8 is the ending for Mark. Inevitably, what was going to happen. Multiple endings are trying to solve that by fix it up. I honestly don't see Res Gestae unless if we had a copy of the Res Gestae and somebody had tried to fix it up, give alternative endings, if it had lost the original in the first century or something. So I don't see it, Bill. That's all I can say about it.
Mm-hmm. All right. The next question comes from Naomi. She said, you contrast peace through victory with peace through justice. Can you elaborate on how these competing visions played out in first century Mediterranean world? Did other peoples conquered by Rome have alternative visions of peace, such as Paul's?
Okay, in the first part, peace through victory is simply the mantra of Roman imperial theology. I started with that in the in the Latin version of the Res Gestae in Ankara, on that temple in Ankara. You have that marvelous statement, terra marique, parta victoriis pax. It's almost like a line of poetry. Terra marique, on land and sea, parta victoriis pax. Peace established by victories. It's like a mantra. Peace established by victories. And Augustus would say, why are you surprised? You got another way to do it? We didn't invent this program. We just got really good at it. Peace through victory, of course. And then you get justice and everything else, he would say. So it really made me think, the more I read the Roman stuff, well, if these guys, a Jesus or a Paul, are in the first century Roman Empire, and they're talking about peace, and Paul mentions it at the start of every epistle, wouldn't an ordinary Roman say to them, we got it already, Paul, whoever you are. Why are you talking about peace? How are you different? There's no other way except peace through victory, and we've got it. So I had to think, what would they have said? And I think they would have said, going back to Genesis and the Torah and the prophets and the wisdom tradition. And so it's not like they're inventing it. You only get peace when you have distributive justice, when everyone gets a fair share of God's stuff, God's world. Then you get peace. So in one sense, it was inevitable And I was thinking of it very much, of course, at Christmas time, that you have basically two programs for peace. And maybe that's why we can't get peace, because if we just get superior weapons to what the other people have, we've got it. And then what you have is lull, Lull, till they get their weapons bigger than your weapons. And off we go again. So that's where it came from. How that would play out, I don't mean it's easy. All you got to say is peace through justice. No, peace through victory demands you do this, you do that, you do all the other stuff. Give peace through justice the same amount of attention, care, plots, plans, programs, and we'll see how it works, actually. Now, he's also, do other people come turn? Well, yes, yeah. The Celts, for example, very much the Celts in the forests, or the German forests, or the Irish bogs, had their own idea of peace, and their also their old idea of war. So in one sense, I think the big alternative, almost I think of it as the tectonic plates of history. Peace through victory seems to be the dominant presumption. That's the way we get it. If only we can get enough space under our control and enough weapons bigger than your weapons. But then, of course, we come with guns and you have only bows and arrows, and we win. And then you learn how to use guns. You know it. It's escalatory violence. Now, could we have escalatory justice? That's the challenge, because there is no other alternative that I can see, honestly, to the peace through victory. I was going to say dream, nightmare. It's a nightmare because it doesn't work. It simply doesn't work because of escalation.
Yeah. The next question comes from Bill, who, and I didn't know this, but he said he heard you say it, I guess, at some point in the Q&A. But he's heard both of us claim that Psalm 82 is one of our favorite passages in Scripture. And he asks, am I correct that it depicts God acting in the divine council against other deities ruling by way of civilization?
Yes. I mean, basically, I love that psalm because it imagines God. Of course, God wouldn't be alone up in heaven. That would be boring. I mean, he doesn't have Netflix, so what else would he do? So he has a huge council around him, and he's really running a judgment on the world, on the people, the powers that be, who's running the world. And basically, he indicts them for lack of justice. That's the indictment. You can read it. Write down, this is not right. And so they are judged. Now, the interesting thing is you're waiting for God to punish them. He doesn't punish them. He simply tells them, you'll die like ordinary princes. So he's looking at, as it were, the gods who run the world but aren't just. And he says, I don't destroy you. You will simply die of your own vacuity, like any prince, like any mortal prince, like the great empires. So it's consequences, not punishments, that make the great empires come and go one after the other, the same dreary parade of inevitability. And read that one again and again. And then there's the line in there about, what is that line I'm trying to think of? Oh, yeah. Injustice shakes the foundations of the earth. There's that line in there that I think we should take and, put it up on our mirrors in the morning, the first thing you see dreary-eyed when you hit the bathroom. Injustice shakes the foundations of the earth. There's nothing about it. It really annoys God. He's going to punish you. Injustice shakes the foundations of the earth. Oops. Oops. That's the scariest line in the whole Bible. And the scary stuff is really not in the book of Revelation. Injustice shakes the foundations of the earth. That's scary.
That line, I'd never thought about its connection till I read the question. But justice shaking the foundations of the earth reminds me of in Genesis 4, where the blood, when Cain kills Abel, the blood on the ground calls out, right? That the the way in which creation was formed was to be in this harmony of justice and such. So this initial sin and breaking from the fratricide all the way to the unjust powers ruling the world are at odds with the grain of the universe, not an expression of it.
And the other great thing there is that God tries rather desperately in the story not to punish Cain, but to mark him so nobody will go after him. You're thinking of the desert escalating blood feud. So they're imagined as having all their progeny there. So he marks Cain so it won't spiral. So God tries to stop the inevitable spiral. That doesn't work, of course.
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting how these kind of domination systems use the preservation of their own self-preservation as the logic for escalating violence and power and such. And both and in that psalm, it's the natural consequence of civilization is that you're going to die. That's what when God takes the throne, it's like, y'all are going to die just like a normal prince. Yeah. You don't see this? Like you're setting yourself up to die, because that's not how this should work.
When postscript to this, in the medieval time, everyone figured, well, Cain should be punished. We can't get away with it. So there's this story that Lamech is blind. He's a blind hunter, and he goes out hunting with his bow and arrow, and he hears a movement in the bushes, shoots into the bushes, and kills Cain. So Lamech kills Cain in the medieval legend. So now we got everything solved. We've escalatory violence and Cain's dead. You must say, excuse me, according to this, then who's going to kill Lamech?
Yeah. All right. Aidan, who I believe is a Lutheran clergy, what resources does Paul offer for addressing humanity's escalatory tendencies towards violence? I'm thinking about this task leading a congregation.
Well, Paul is doing exactly what you're doing, Aidan. He's leading a bunch of congregations, and the peskiest bunch of them all are those Corinthians. And so you can see him struggling actually with to have his vision inculcated. And one thing that Paul has, which does not invalidate his vision, by the way, is he does think that the end is coming within his own lifetime. Yes, he does. And he's wrong, off by 2,000 years and counting. But that is not his motivation for his theology. That might be a motivation added to it. But his theology is that Christ was crucified. That was the revelation to us. I'm going a little bit into my next lecture. That was God's revelation to us of the savage heart of civilization. And as he says to the Corinthians, the rulers of this world didn't understand that, because if they did, they would never have crucified the Lord of glory. It revealed their own savage heart. So basically, you can watch Paul struggling with his congregation. Watch them struggling back. They do. They really do. The Corinthians, they said, we want to know what kind of a body does this Jesus have? They're good Platonists, and they've no problem with Jesus having a soul that's ascended to God or whatever. But a body? So you can watch it happening. Now, I don't think we'd get any sympathy from Paul, who's taking on the Roman Empire, if we're taking on the American Empire. And I'm not certain I would have said that in the same way a year ago. So I think we are going to have to learn a lot about nonviolent resistance, and at a deep level, on a very deep level, on an empowering level, so we don't burn out, because it could be a long haul. And it's very, very consoling to know that 2,000 years ago, Paul, and then Jesus before him in the Jewish homeland, were struggling with the same thing: how to handle a great empire, if at least you get enough freedom, if you do, that you won't be killed when you open your mouth completely. Mm-hmm. You have some time to at least say a different glimpse or you can wait at least until the empire begins to make the foolish mistakes that all empires do as they're going into oblivion. And then you at least have an alternative in place.
Yeah. Well, thank you. Russell has the next question. He said, when you said, if we ain't, it ain't, do you leave room for God's kingdom beyond human history? And you might want to give some context for that bit at the end of the lecture.
All right. Russell, I am totally involved in the next life here below. I'm totally involved in the next world here below. Maybe that's a little bit unusual since I'm getting ready more or less to departed. And I already see the twilights, but twilights are nice. So I think I would like to focus on that. I really want to focus on that. I would like to ask theists and atheists to stop that argument for the next 2,000 years, if we have 2,000 years, and focus on evolution and the consequences of what we are doing. Consequences. Again, I repeat, not punishments, not divine punishments, but evolutionary consequences. What we're doing to the world, what we're doing to other animals, and what we're doing to ourselves. I want to focus on that. I do not want to say anything about future human history in another world or get into an argument about it. I have not want to argue against it. Do not want to argue for it. If somebody asks me, where am I personally, I'm quite willing to tell you, but I don't think that's the issue. I think that may be a giant transcendental red herring. Let's argue about the next world. And while we're doing it, this world is going, as it were, to hell in a basket. So I really want to focus on that, this world.
Yeah. And I think that's one of the things in Paul the Pharisee that's helpful is following the lead of the philosophers in trying to demonstrate that Paul's vision has purchase for the present, regardless of what happens when you bracket the larger God question.
Yeah, the three philosophers, German, French, and Italian, deliberately set out to think, okay, Paul's a philosopher. Philosophers claim to speak to the ages. Okay, let's take him at his word. See, does he have anything to say? If he's nothing to say, then he's a dead philosopher. If he's a living philosopher, he's something to say. So I was kind of inspired by them, not to become a philosopher, honestly. But okay, it's possible to do this, and I'm going to do it as a theologian.
Yeah. All right. The last few questions are not they aren't following through in the same way with the focus on the lecture itself. Linda asked, what happened to the Galatian communities Paul formed? Who was stirring things up there?
Oh, Linda, I wish I really knew the answer to that question, honestly. I don't know what happened to Galatia. I've read Mitchell's two great books on Galatia, and yeah, they survived. Of course, there's still Christianity in Galatia. It's not that it died out, but what happened to Pisidian Antioch? I wonder, and this is just wondering, sort of off the top of my head. They were Roman colonies. A colony is a town set up for troops, as it were. They've filled their 20 years or whatever, and they're set up now. Does that make them very loyal to Rome? Yes, to the Roman system. Does that make them open to a message from Paul? Does that make them antithetical to Paul? I don't know. I really don't know. But at least it continued afterwards. If you go and try and figure the history of Christianity in Galatia, I don't know much about it. I just know it exists, to be honest with you. In the highlands of Phrygia, for example, there's a long history of Christianity. But now, in answer to the second part, stirring things up there, I'm presuming that Luke gets this right, that Paul goes to the synagogues on the Sabbath to go for the God worshippers. And I am presuming that that really stirs things up. I don't have to imagine there's a group from Jerusalem following Paul from city to city and stirring up the people. I think if you go into the synagogue on a Sabbath and try to poach the God worshippers, you're going to have some God worshippers mad at you, some fellow Jews mad at you. It may spill out into the streets and have Roman authorities mad at you. So what Paul is doing is stirring things up. If Paul was standing in the agora, as I said, or the forum and telling them about this, let me put it this way, this new God called Jesus, the Romans wouldn't particularly worry. A new God, yeah, we love gods. There's lots of them around. Just do remember to stand up for the national anthem, as it were. Just remember that the God, of course, is the God Sebastos, is Augustus or Tiberius, but we've no problem with this. Paul is constantly in trouble because Paul is poaching God worshippers, God-fearers in Jewish synagogues. That's the only place he can find them. They're not going to have a thing on their door saying God worshipper here. So I don't find it difficult to understand why there's turmoil always with Paul. I expect it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. All right. The next question, Pasquale asked, could Christianity have survived without Rome's protection and legal infrastructure?
Probably not. Probably not. It might be one more little thing, like maybe John the Baptist, for example, would have maybe lived on if it was mentioned in Josephus enough. But no, I think two things had to happen. First of all, it had to move out of Galilee to Jerusalem. I think that's a crucial thing, that Jesus went to Jerusalem and had supporters there who almost had him get away with it, almost. Also, it moved out from there. And secondly, Paul wrote. If you get it into text and the text survive, it's at least going to go out from that. But that could only happen if you had the Jewish tradition of, how would I put it, of a scribal knowledge and the Roman infrastructure. You could not have criticized Rome without the Roman infrastructure. If you imagine Rome wasn't there and all of these are small little places and Paul has arrived, say, somewhere in the mountains of Phrygia, everyone would say, who's this guy? He's probably some kind of a spy from Pisidia. Let's just kill him in case, and God could sort it out. None of this could have happened. Paul writing to Rome, I'm finished in the east and I'm on my way to the west, to Spain. I mean, just think about it. It had to be in the Roman Empire. The Spanish Roman, Spain was under Rome too. He's probably going to Tarragona. Absolutely not.
Yeah. Quick follow-up. Linda asked, what was the book by Mitchell that you mentioned?
Anatolia. I think the first name is Anatolia. It's a 2-volume. It's hard to get. It's Anatolia. There's 2 subtitles. Give me a second. I'm going away from my thing. Just give me 1 second.
Well, Dom's actually going to find the book. I'll just say, hey, if y'all want to come to Theology Beer Camp in October, Dom's coming. We're gonna have some fun. It is like over 50 different theologians and other podcasters talk about God. 600 people, 3 days, lots of delicious beverages, and Dom's going to be talking about the groaning of creation. So,
right. No, thank you. This was a very good question from Linda, and I wanted to tell you. It is called Anatolia. It's by Stephen Mitchell, MIT-CGL. The first volume is Land, Men, and Gods in Asia Minor. That's the first one. The second one is Land, Men, and Gods in Asia Minor. I'm sorry. The name is Anatolia. The subtitle of both is Land, Men, and Gods in Asia Minor. The first one is The Celts. Hey, for the Celts. and the impact of Roman rule. And the second one is the rise of the church. So, in answer to the question, what happened in Galatia, both of those books, I've read the first one very, very thoroughly. I've only skimmed the second one, to be obvious, because I was interested more in the first one. But it's a very good question, and so is the question about what happened in Galatia. So I want you to know those books are there. They're hard to get a hand on. I had great difficulty finding them. We could find them for exorbitant prices, but to try and find them at something like a humane price, chase them and see what happens.
Awesome. All right, so we got two quick questions here. Al asked, why wasn't Hebrews included in your three categories of Paul's letters? Which category would it belong to?
The non-category. It's not written by Paul at all. I think any idea that Hebrew was written by Paul is simply, trying to get everything into the same basket. It has nothing whatsoever to do with Paul. Nothing against it. It's just not Pauline in any way, shape, or form.
And let's see, the last one, but Dan asked about Paul preaching in a post-Jewish context similar to our post-Christian culture. And the longer version involved kind of references to this shift in, from the shift in Jerusalem to Rome, and then the transformation of religion throughout kind of his ministry and his self-understanding of the church.
Okay, Dan. I don't know if this really answers it, but it's something I want to say in any case. I think, I'll leave Paul aside for a moment. I think the wisdom of Judaism in the first century to have these God worshippers or God-fearers or God lovers or whatever name you want, and to be satisfied with them, not to insist, no, if you're coming to synagogue, you have to convert, and if you're male, we want, circumcision. No, they had the great wisdom of letting this group come to the synagogue and stay as Roman males, uncircumcised, but I'm going to call it conversion by attraction. If you're so good as you think yourself, just be yourself and see what happens. If people are attracted to your God, to your morality, to your family values, to your services in the synagogue, your teaching services, maybe that's more than enough. Maybe if you push, no, you have to be, you have to become a convert. And this, say an aristocrat in the city decides to become Jewish and be circumcised, and his family is furious because he's taken out of the cursus honorum, maybe. Then, no, I think Christianity has made a huge mistake in not deciding to go with, Jesus said, both are attributed to Jesus. If you're not with me, you're against me. But also, if you're not against me, you're with me. If you're not against me, you're with me. I think that is something we Christians, especially in America, especially now, are going to have to take very, very seriously in the next few years. Who basically are with me and who are against me. And I'm not going to worry too much about the tags on them. So I think for a post-Christian culture, because I am absolutely convinced, let me tell you, that Christianity has a message for the world, an evolutionary message for the world that is powerful and persuasive when it is not destroyed by all the normal ways in which an institution destroys the mission it started and negates the vision that was its initiation. That's what institutions do. It's their job to destroy their vision.
Well, sadly, that is one of the least controversial things you said today, Dom. It's the human predicament is quite ubiquitously displayed in institutions. Now, I thank you for everyone who sent in questions. This has been great, and thank you for sending them in. Not 3 or 4 hours before we started, so I could try to shorten them and organize them, and Dom and I could get on the same page. That really helps. Next week, we're talking about Josephus. So knowing what the next lecture is and looking at Paul in relationship with Josephus, what's the invitation or the questions maybe we should be carrying into that lecture?
All right, they're both Pharisees. That's both first century Pharisees.
Yeah. And for people that don't know anything about Josephus, if they're like, where did he show up? I didn't hear him in Acts.
He's, by the way, as far as I know, you can find him online. I think all his works are online, so at least you could always get to anything I'm talking about.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. All righty. Well, thank you, Dom, and thank you, everyone. And we'll look for